Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about the Nomad, which is the newest starter ship from Consolidated Outland. I have to admit, at first I was a bit apprehensive about this vessel, and now looking back, I think that most of those feelings were formed after seeing some leaked images of it, and those images didn't depict it in a very good light. Since then, I've had a chance to get an up-close and personal look at the Nomad, and after seeing it firsthand on the showroom floor of the expo, little by little my negative attitude started to melt away. Finally, it softened up to the point where I could really begin to appreciate it for what it is. And what it is an extremely strong starter ship. In fact, it's arguably the best one so far to be bundled along with a game package. This holds especially true if you're the kind of person who values utilitarianism and performance over everything else, which I happen to be. For years now, the Avenger Titan has been my top recommendation for a starter ship because it was the best value for what you got in return, and I still really think it is. But the Nomad takes that same philosophy and steps it up. It's actually supposed to be a kind of intermediary step that rests somewhere between the Avenger and the Cuddy, and in a lot of ways it sort of reminds me of a mini Cutlass. And it has every single one of the amenities that every one of the other starter ships have, and it seems to carry more cargo than all of them combined. The Nomad also has a better weapons loadout than any of those other vessels. It comes stock with 3 gimbaled size 2 repeaters that can be upgraded to 3 size 3 fixed guns. That's the same loadout that most military light fighters have. Now, I'm not saying for one second that this ship is going to be able to stand up to an Arrow or a Gladius, but it does come with an impressive allotment of weapons, especially for a beginner ship. It also has 3 small shields. This is very important because it puts the Nomad on the same defensive level as the Saber. And for those who don't know, 3 small shields is, for all intents and purposes, the equivalent to a single medium-sized shield. The last thing that it has for armaments are 8 size 2 missiles that are mounted onto 4 dedicated missile racks. And if you look at the outside of the Nomad, you can see the tips of the missiles poking out of a series of slits that line both sides of the ship. Having 4 racks means that you should be able to hold 4 missile locks at one time, because you can hold 1 missile lock per rack, and then be able to fire all 4 of the missiles simultaneously. The view from the Nomad's flight deck really falls somewhere between the strutted caged look of the Aurora and the near pristine open canopy that the Mustang has. But it also extends that view well below its console line, much like the Aurora does. I really like that option for when you're flying planetside because you're able to see what the terrain looks like that's just below your ship. The Nomad's console doesn't have any physical buttons or switches on it. Instead, it's covered from left to right with all touchscreens. And the center readout has a glass partition where all the HUD information is displayed, much like you'd find in the Gladius, which for me gives it more of a fighter ship feel than it does a cargo hauler. And just behind the cockpit is the Habitation Module. Admittedly, it's got a very similar feel to the Mustang Betas, but its design is a lot more refined, and it's been given a few more quality of life additions that the Beta doesn't have. Like for instance, the pull-out chair that can be tucked away to give you a little more room when it's not being used. The bed has a series of shelves that line the adjoining wall where you can place knickknacks and other small items. And it has a monitor that's set up so you can watch TV while you're lying down. Just across from it's a small galley that has nearly everything that you need to satisfy all of your basic hunger needs. It's spacious, easy to get at, and it's big enough to nearly dominate one entire wall of the habitation section. And there's even another room past that which is being referred to as the Foyer. This aftmost inner portion of the ship holds a bathroom, components cabinet, storage locker, a rear window that overlooks the back of the cargo bay, and 2 weapons racks. And it should be noted that the Nomad's bathroom is not the patented shower-bathroom combo that Star Citizen is so famous for. It's more of a no-frills bathroom-only setup, which is so tightly packed in that you can't shut the door when you're sitting down, so make sure to remember that when you have company over. Across from the bathroom is a storage locker that you can use for holding pretty much anything you want. Mainly I'm thinking that'd be a good place to store armor, an extra component, or any kind of mission-critical items that you'd want to bring along with you. Although ideally you'd also be able to put some empty cargo boxes on the ship's flatbed and store as much of your stuff as you'd like that way, but I'd like the idea of having some space that's been specifically set aside as a storage closet, just in case you were hauling a vehicle or a full load of cargo and you still wanted to have that little extra storage space to work with. The components locker gives you internal access to the ship's quantum drive and power plant, so in case you had any issues with either of those 2 components, you wouldn't have to exit the ship in order to replace or repair them. This is also where the only exit to the ship is located, and flanking it on either side is a weapons rack that you can arm up on your way out or drop whatever weapons you have off on your way back in. In the very back of the foyer is a window that overlooks the cargo bed, and I call it a cargo bed mainly because it's more like the flatbed of a truck rather than any kind of cargo bay that most ships traditionally have. It can hold a total of 24 SCUs, so you're not going to feel like you're wasting your time doing cargo runs with this ship. And to put this into perspective, that places the Nomad somewhere in between ships like the 315P and some freelancer variants like the Misk and the Dur when it comes to being able to haul cargo. But in addition to hauling cargo and carrying personal supplies, the cargo grid can also be used to transport vehicles. I want to start out by going over what the most obvious thing is that it can carry, and that's the rock. And this vehicle was made to be carried by a Nomad, and it fits like a glove into the flatbed. They can also handle carrying a number of other vehicles, like all the Cyclones. This includes the TR, which because of its turret is slightly taller than the rest of the other variants, it requires a little more clearance space in order to get into some ships. The only thing about the Cyclones is that you're going to have to hug the right side of the cargo bed to make enough room for the driver to get out. And if you have a passenger, then you're going to have to make sure that they get out of the vehicle first before you load it into the Nomad. It can also hold a couple of Gravlev bikes, but it's not recommended that you use this vessel to try to transport them, at least not for now. And it's not a matter of them fitting. Even the longer chassis of the Dragonfly sits in the bed just fine. It's that once the bed is raised into position, it'll toss the bikes around like they owe it money, which usually results in them and the Nomad taking damage. So for now, and until they tighten up the physics grids for the Gravlevs, I'd recommend using something else to carry a bike. And I did get a couple of Noxes in the back, and they fit into that space even better than the Dragonflies did. But unfortunately, they'll have the same exact problem as the Dragonflies when you raise the bed back into position. Actually, if you do this on a low-gravity moon, you can launch the Noxes up into the air like the Nomad with some kind of futuristic trebuchet. It's fun, but not at all practical. Buggies are cool. You can take them around wherever you want without any issues. But buggies are always cool, though. In fact, they're the only piece of hangar flare that's managed to graduate up to becoming a full-blown vehicle. It's truly the Star Citizen version of the Pinocchio story. So they've got nothing to prove. I also thought that I might be able to get a rover into the back and just deal with it having its extra length hanging over the side like a big overstuffed burrito, but the reality of it is that you can't even get the rover inside of it at all. It's just a little too wide. In addition to all of its other features, the Nomad's going to have a rear-facing tractor beam mounted in the back that's going to be used to pull cargo into the hold, much like what the setup for the Cutlass Black is. I'm hoping that it could be also used to pull an incapacitated vehicle up onto the cargo grid, or even to tow a small vehicle behind it, say like a Ranger or a functioning Gravlev. There are a few other things about this ship that I think are really interesting and unique, like the Xi'an-style landing gear. This allows the ship to hover in place like it's sitting Master Blaster style on the back of two Noxes. Opinions seem to really polarize over this issue, but personally, I love it. Uniqueness yields personality, and anything that makes a ship stand out from the rest of the herd is a good thing in my book. And I've been looking forward to seeing a ship have this kind of landing mechanism ever since the first Gravlev was introduced into the game. The only disappointing thing about this for me was that I was really hoping that you could move the Nomad in the 4 cardinal directions when it was hovering. You know, like being able to stray forward, back, and from side to side like an actual Gravlev does. Because hover bikes are still being worked on, there is a chance that it might be able to do this in the future. So, fingers crossed on that one. One thing that I've been trying to stay away from in my reviews is looking at ships from the perspective of someone who's buying them to crowdfund the game, and more from the perspective of someone who's purchasing these ships in-game using the in-game currency. Because all of these vessels are going to be purchasable in-game. These ships aren't meant to be looked at as Pokemon, and you don't have to collect them all. In fact, I think that players who start the game with one ship and earn their way up from there are going to have a much more rewarding experience than the people who've nearly bought everything already are going to have. But since this is a starter ship, I really can't ignore its actual store price, so I'm going to take a second and compare its cost with the other starter packages. The best thing about the Mustang Alpha and the Aurora MR is that you can get them bundled along with a game package for $45, and sometimes for less if you can pick one up during a sale. That'll give you full access to the game and a ship that you can start earning UEC with. There's no additional microtransactions involved, and it's just a one-time purchase, and from that point on, you can buy everything else in-game. Now, the Nomad is bundled with a game package that sells for $80, which is almost double the price of the Legacy starter ships. But it's also going to be far more than double the value of what you're getting out of the Aurora or the Mustang. And I go as far as to say that when it comes to features, this is a lot better ship than the 100i or the Reliant Core. And that's why they're referring to it as an upgraded starter ship. It's versatile, it can hold its own in combat, and can carry a decent amount of cargo for its size. Think of it as a combination camper pickup truck that goes about doing its thing in its own unique way. But for all of its positive qualities, there's still one criticism that I've very commonly heard being said about this ship, and it's about its looks. And I don't mean with its overall aesthetics. I mean with how oddly non-consolidatedly outlandish that it looks. The Xi'an-infused mix of tech is more of a Misk thing, and the overall outer appearance seems to be more Anvil than Elon Musk. But, in its defense, the lore for this vessel states that it's supposed to be a departure from the manufacturer's typical style guide, and it's an attempt to try something that's very different both aesthetically and functionally from what they've traditionally done in the past. For me, that tagline and this mismashing of differing styles feels more like it was a very deliberate move that was done to broaden the brand's appeal to an audience that Consolidated Outland doesn't normally appeal to. The Nomad's a camper, a pathfinder, a decent combatant, and a hauler. All of these are traits that are associated with vessels that Misk specializes in, while Consolidated Outland has become more synonymous with forward-thinking projects and not utilitarian ships that were made for the general public. And all the overall impressions that a lot of the greebling and design choices that have been made for this ship seems to have been specifically done to make it unnecessarily feel like it's trying to be more of these things than it really is. Like with the cockpit's HUD being designed to make you feel like you're in a small fighter craft, even though this is not the kind of ship that I'd go around looking to pick a fight in. And in how the angled look of the chassis gives it the impression that it's rugged and durable, but the reality is that its hull is not reinforced, nor is it heavily armored. But even so, when compared to the other starter ships, this is going to be one of the best choices that you could go for. It has everything you need to begin the game with and offers the widest spectrum of options for a player to indulge in right from the start. It doesn't focus in on one area, and the things that it does provide, it excels at. Yet its biggest problem is that it feels like it's trying to overcompensate when in reality, it really doesn't need to. That's going to be it for this video on the Nomad. I'd like to thank everybody for liking and subscribing because it helps the channel to grow and it really helps to improve my visibility on YouTube. I'd also like to thank my patrons for supporting the channel, because if it wasn't for their help, I wouldn't be able to keep putting the time and effort that I do into making these videos. If you'd like to become a patron, then you'll find a link to my Patreon channel in the description of this video. And before I end up going, I'd like to leave you with a short tour of the Nomad, so I'll make sure to stick around for that. Thanks for watching, and take care.